Hello every folks and good morning. Welcome to a early game build and class guide, hopefully covering all of the information that you need to know to start effectively building your units in different ways. So without any further ado, let's get started. First and most importantly, how do you identify a good unit? Because before we even give somebody a job, we need to know what they're actually even good at. So let's cover what the stats do real quick. So let's go over here. So first of all, we see that we're a bit too broke to actually hire anyone, so we go ahead and inherit a little bit of money from the war fund, and let's go ahead and hire somebody. So first things first, when you go over the screen here, what you have to know is that any unit will essentially be gifted in certain ways. Some can be good at certain stats, some will be very good at certain things, and some will just be outright awful at certain things. So like for example right here, we see that this lady's evasion is appalling. She refuses to dodge anything. But generally speaking, the way it comes down is this. If you want to have a character that is very good at hitting things physically, most of the time strength is going to be the biggest number that you want to see up here. Dexterity is the second damage dealing number. Essentially both of these will be combined, depending on what weapon's being used, what skill is being used. By and large, both strength and dexterity will contribute to your physical offense. Vitality, on the other hand, is your physical defense, and it also combines with strength. So this affects both of these things. Agility, on the other hand, is your accuracy. This can vary in a lot of different ways, but generally speaking, this is not a particularly important one, since most of your attacks will already have pretty high accuracy, but there's certain skills that will check agility. Avoidance, on the other hand, is your ability to dodge things, and while a low score isn't the end of the world, because everyone's already fairly accurate, if you see somebody that's very good at avoidance, they might potentially be an absolute game changer in the right circumstances, so just something to consider. Intelligence is your primary magic damage dealing stat. Mind is the stat that primarily affects your odds of landing debuffs, and bear in mind, these are both going to be for your weapon debuffs, your skill debuffs, just any kind of debuffs whatsoever. Whether they're important or not, mind is going to be the main one that determines this, and then resistance is going to be your primary magic resistance, as you'd kind of expect. Okay, so let's say we're looking at any unit. I would say right off the bat, probably don't bother hiring them from the store. You can just hire them in the middle of a fight. But when you're looking at these different stats, like you can see this guy has extremely high agility compared to his other stats. It's noticeably higher, and he's got some pretty good intelligence too. So he might be, he might be good as a caster in that case. This guy's got very high mind and resistance, therefore he might potentially be very good at being a debuff wizard. Whereas we see this guy has very high strength and vitality and dexterity. He actually rolled 4 high stats in this case. So this guy would make for an excellent frontliner, because frontliners, generally speaking, are weak to magic, so having high resistance, while also having 3 solid good physical stats here, he'd be a pretty good winner as far as that goes. Now, again, you're not looking for specific numbers. You don't want to sit here re-rolling for maximum amounts all day or whatever else, but just so you know, that's what they do. If you see a number that is drastically higher than everything else, then there you go, that's what they're talented at. Okay, let's get into what these classes actually do. So you have 12 classes that are available right from the get-go, again, here in the early game, that pretty much everybody can use. So I'll explain what they do and where to get them. There's actually a rule in this game that the first time that you run into a class, and if you kill that class, you'll always get 3 of their class mark as long as they drop a bag. So for example, everyone starts off the game with 3 knight class marks because the first boss is a knight. Pretty much immediately after, over here in the Archaeopolis of Rhyme, the second class that you end up unlocking is going to be the Beast Tamer, and this guy is just sitting there with his best friend, the dragon there, and he'll end up dropping 3 marks for you as well. The Dragoon, on the other hand, is available typically around this area. Usually immediately as you start Chapter 2, you will end up running into a Dragoon within a couple of fights, and again, if you kill them, you get their class marks. Additionally, if we're curious where we managed to get a Swordmaster from, if you were to go into the Farampa Wildwood over here, and follow the map all the way to the right, you will find several maps that will have sword masters. You can either recruit them or you can kill them for their class marks. The class marks are less common of a drop over there because they're not a story encounter, but you know, if you want a sword master, just go in there and hire one. And then next up is the Terror Knight, which that one you get pretty much immediately at the start of Chapter 2. Both Chapter 2 fights, again, at the start, like in Law, it's the very first fight that has a Terror Knight that will drop them. In Chaos, it's going to be the fight with Zapan that will have a Terror Knight right there. Both of them are going to charge directly at you. There's a pretty decent chance you're probably going to get it by accident. But let's start covering what you can actually do with these classes, as well as some good early game builds for you to work with. So by and large, I would say probably my favorite early game warrior build right here is essentially just going to be the Poison Claw. This is a build that is so good that when the One Vision mod happened, it just became the standard for claw weapons. So let me explain a little bit about what the warrior does. So the warrior is your weapons specialist. They can equip more weapons than everybody else, but other than that, it's really just all about hitting things for them. So you can boost their health, you can boost their MP, you can make them pincer, which means that they'll do a follow-up if any unit ends its turn with their back to them that you've already attacked. They've got Siege, which allows them to sacrifice one movement in order to ignore rampant auras. They've got the usual resists, and they can have two different ways to guarantee that their hits will land. So these are usable depending on what you really want. So Vigorous Attack is going to make everybody around them have a 100% chance to hit, which additionally comes with the added effect that anything like this right here, where if you have any weapon that says it has an on-hit effect, will be guaranteed. If you ever see 100%, this also means that this will be guaranteed. So, depending on how you want to look at it, Vigorous Attack allows you to pretty much always have a chance to poison with these claws, whereas Mighty Impact will guarantee a critical hit and allow you to, once again, guarantee that poison, but you can choose when it happens. So, it's up to you whether you want to just kind of adapt on the fly or guarantee that, that something will happen. Both choices are there. But when it comes to this build, poison will scale based off of health, so this is just a solid build. What we're going for here is we're going for the Bronze Helm for that strength and vitality, going for the Chainmail for, once again, the strength and vitality, the Gauntlets for the strength and vitality, and once again Chain Leggings for the strength and vitality. Over here we also got the Warrior Ring, which in this particular case is used for what I like to refer to as penetration. Basically, attack score is going to improve your performance versus armor. So in this case, a claw is considered a heavier weapon, and generally speaking, this will improve that penetration a little bit. It barely weighs anything. So this is going to have an easier time punching past some mid and heavyweight units. So overall, we're looking at a build here that is able to hit hard, it's able to leave that unit poisoned, and in many cases, all they need is one Mighty Strike on somebody, and they can simply go walk away and deal with somebody else. They give them one big hit, poison finishes them off, and they can go off to do other things. Additionally, they've got Vigorous Attack, because there's a lot of weapons at this point that will have those on-hit effects, which means that they're a good support as well. So I like going for something like this, because again, Mighty Impact, you take a hit, they poison, you set them up for a pincer attack, and then Vigorous happens to go on there as well. Or, if we're going about it the other way, let's say Vigorous triggers, they're able to guarantee a poison on something. They set up for a pincer, but they also activate their Mighty Impact, which means that you attack with somebody else, and then they will pincer in a second poison effect as well. They're just very, very good at spreading around damage. Okay, next warrior build. This one's a fan favorite for a lot of folks here, and that's just the standard hit the dude with a big weapon. So at this point, Zweihander +1, pretty solid weapon, will have that on-hit breach effect. Can again combine with Mighty Impact. In their case, they're just basically running ahead and hitting stuff, and occasionally setting themselves behind other units in order to set up a pincer. A fun little tip on this, by the way, they don't always have to be sitting behind the other unit. Simply speaking, if you see that somebody has a counterattack, you can simply attack them from the other side, and they will be able to activate that pincer, because the unit has to turn in order to counter. So this one's fairly obvious and straightforward. Big dude, hit thing with big weapon, and it will ruin their defense because of this on-hit breach effect. Alright, simple enough. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next we have the Archer, the second basic class that you get right off the start of the game, and these are effectively a ranged variant of that warrior there. They will be able to use bows, they'll be able to use crossbows, as well as daggers for self-defense, and generally speaking are going to be a range support type of unit. Primarily, you want to keep these guys out of range, but there are a couple different builds that are pretty fun to do with them. So first, we go with the standard, essentially just going for very long range here. Now, what you want to do is ideally either stack Vitality or stack Dexterity. If you want to improve their overall offense, you can actually leave them with the basic leather armor. It will have a better Dexterity bonus, leather sleeves, leather leggings, or, you know, as it's more commonly called, just sticking them with leathers. But either way, you can go ahead and give them all of these different Dexterity bonuses. This unit will, by and large, be staying out of range, so you don't really have to worry about their armor being very good at protecting them, seeing as this bow comes with 8 range. Just so you know, you can fire beyond this bow's range. The trajectory marker will always tell you where the arrow will land, so you can usually fire 1 or 2 tiles beyond that, and if you go higher, you can easily double your range or more. Alright, so as far as their skills go, they have dramatically less than the warrior here. But if you're going for a standard build, you really just need bows or crossbows on there. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to actually swap out between these depending on the map that you're fighting. So for example, if you're fighting uphill, you want to be using crossbows, but if you're fighting downhill or on an even plane, you usually want to be using bows to give you more lines to fire from. With their different skills, you've got back attack, which will basically just improve their accuracy passively. This one is not amazing. It's just kind of another thing to have on their list if you want. Really, it just boosts accuracy. That being said, this one will boost accuracy pretty regularly, whereas something like Eagle Eye right here will guarantee the hit, as well as any secondary effects, while being less likely to trigger. And then at the same time, like before, we have the Tremendous Shot here to guarantee the hit. So same rules as the warrior there. If you have a weapon that's upgraded and has an on-hit effect, they will be able to guarantee that effect, which is again available from the store right from the get-go. If we go over to these craftables right here, one thing I would recommend early on is to go pick up some short bow plus ones. They're cheap and easy to craft, and will also allow them to guarantee stun when they hit. Now, with the different bows that you have available, for example, the short bow will do less overall damage, but being able to simply point at somebody and say, hey, you're going to lose your turn 50% of the time now, is pretty handy. So, as far as these builds go, there's really 2 that I see as the main ones. So this would be your obvious long-range sniper sword. Just build for dexterity, just pick armor that gives them dexterity bonuses, a long-range bow, and any kind of ring that will give them a bonus. So typically Warrior Ring is pretty good at this point, though Ring of the Horde and Ring of Dexterity will certainly be helpful for them as you travel on through Chapter 2 and 3. Very basic, you just pick out weak targets and go ahead and go for them. This is especially useful when combined with things like that breach effect from that warrior earlier. Basically, anytime that there's a unit that is weak, has low defense, or has had its defense damaged in some way, they will be able to do tremendously more damage. The longbow in particular gives them a lot of extra damage under the right circumstances. So while their initial damage may seem weak, using them in the right way will cause their numbers to go up pretty much exponentially. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I have seen a hit go from 10 damage all the way up to over 1,000, depending on how many debuffs were applied to the target. Alright, so that's the long-range archer, but the short-range archer is something that's a little bit more tricky. So this is not really something that I'd necessarily recommend for all newcomers, but if you're feeling a little bit more confident, this might be something for you to play around with. So the purpose of this one is what I like to call the skirmisher. Essentially, we're talking a case where they keep the dagger for 2 purposes. One is a chance to parry, but it's fairly low. The other is for the dagger skill, which once they get this up a little bit, their access to finishers will be pretty solid. See, the dagger will essentially do more damage than either of these bows, and especially if you happen to have, like, let's say, an archer with wind, they have that first dagger finisher. This gives them an opening to exploit any earth units with a high damage, high scaling finisher, so it might be something to consider. But generally speaking, for now, we're just going to go ahead and say that this dagger is here for defensive purposes, and that this short bow is good for landing a debuff on somebody. So stun is something that a wizard would have to take a chance on, whereas the archer can simply say, okay, you are stunned now. So combined with Tremendous Shot or Eagle Eye, this will always land. Okay, moving on. Alright, next up we have the wizard. Now these will come in essentially two flavors. You've got your offensive wizards and you've got your debuff wizards. Realistically speaking, there's really no reason that you can't just be running one or the other. I know personally, I have to say, just putting Poison Cloud on a wizard with concentration by itself was enough of a powerhouse to actually last all the way throughout the entire game. Since again, as we discussed earlier, poison scales. So this is just a solid spell to always have available. When boosted with concentration, you're typically seeing anywhere from about 30 to 100% hit odds against most targets, which will mean that they will be able to melt away 10% of something's health 3 times per turn. So this is especially good considering it hits in an area. So realistically, for new players, I would just say Poison Cloud, Concentration, put some Conserve RT on there, put some Meditate on there. There you go. Everything else is a freebie. If you want to give them a magic or a matching elemental spell, go for it. You want to give them some overhead spells? Sure, go for it. But generally speaking, poison is just going to be a solid backup for anyone to use and abuse as they will. As far as their other debuffs, Petra Burst is very good for making sure a unit definitely can't move right now, but it's a little bit less reliable on its hit odds. Charm is very good for taking a unit that's about to take a turn and turning it against the enemy, but again, lower hit odds, and there's other ways to make this happen. So, for example, by this point, there's a decent chance that you've picked up an item called a Caldea, which allows you to just simply use that spell without putting a slot in there. Anyways, main thing you need to know is that yes, poison and stun are just something that will absolutely carry you through the early game. Generally, you want to spam these as much as possible, and they will end up softening targets for pretty much everybody else. As far as their builds go, they don't have a whole lot in the way of armor options at this point in the game, but you can just upgrade their stuff to let them wade into the water, and then go for either a shield or dagger for defensive purposes. A shield will make them get targeted less often because they've got a higher defense threshold, whereas a dagger might give them a chance to, for example, deflect an arrow out of the way. Now, it depends on which defense you prefer, but both of those are valid options. Generally, though, as soon as you get access to a one-handed staff, you want to go ahead and stick with that, because that added spell range is pretty significant. Alright, moving on to the next one. Alright, next up we move on to the Cleric. Again, this one is not one that you really have to worry too much in terms of their quote-unquote build here. Basically give them a Defender's Ring, you give them their basic armor, upgrade it when you have a chance to. There's not really too much, to swap out here. You can give them better robes and all of that kind of thing. But generally speaking, you're going to see them using these leather gloves and slops straight through most of the game. They're not a particularly heavy armored class. Though I will say they do get access to the Balder Mace a little bit earlier than many of the other characters, so that will give them a little bit of extra range earlier on. As far as the Cleric goes, this is the first class that I would really recommend kind of carrying additional items. Obviously, everyone's preference on these different things will vary, but I know in my case, it was pretty good to carry Fairy Scale Powder around. It just boosts their healing. Just know that healing doesn't really scale like other magic or physical damage. Healing is kind of its own thing, so Fairy Scale is going to be the main thing that will boost it overall. You additionally have other skills later, like for example Mother's Blessing, but Mother's Blessing is not exactly always reliable. It will sometimes trigger at the start of your turn. You can pick up cards to make it more common, but generally speaking, you can just put on this powder, and you'll have slightly better healing right off the bat. So next, I like to carry around a few items to let them do things when, for example, they're out of MP, or I just don't want to have them, wasting their MP for now. So, for example, an Area Ion Plume, if you have some archers nearby, you can have your Cleric boost the archer's attack power this way. Just kind of boost the maximum damage that they can do. If a unit is petrified, this is a harder debuff to get rid of, so some Jaren powder on her is not a bad idea. And then Fear is also something you tend to see start coming up around this point in the game, so it's also a pretty solid idea to keep a Fear removal item here as well. As far as your heals go, you don't always want to go for the bigger and more important heals, but generally speaking, you want to have one that's kind of available for quick use, and you want to have one that's available for more effective. So how you want to slot these out is up to you. Generally speaking, you're going to be getting about 15 to 20 MP per round, and assuming that you had them, sitting around a little bit, you've probably got at least a little bit saved up. So for example, if you want to target one unit to heal a lot, you can spend 30 on that, or you can spend 25 to heal multiple units for a little bit less. But Major Heal, for example, is something that will usually be available pretty consistently, whereas, for example, a Basic Heal will almost always be available. So it's good to kind of tier out your spells there, so that you have low-cost options, you have high-cost options when you need them for specific things. So like, for example, an Exorcism is something that you may always want to keep on hand somewhere in your team, whether through items or whether through spells. So I just went ahead and slotted it in here. But for example, we can keep a cheap heal on here, so that she always has something to heal with. Or we can go for a major heal over here, in order to heal multiple units at once. Or we could, for example, slot in a heal 2, to make sure that she can heal that one unit more. It's kind of up to you. I have Boon of Swiftness on here, just so you know, if you're coming from an FFT, Boon of Swiftness is basically like haste, but it doesn't last as long, but it's also a little bit more intense. So effectively, this just allows one unit to have their next couple turns come quite a bit faster. So again, this is just a nice little pivot for the Cleric to have, where, for example, if you have nobody that's healed, they can go for a little bit of offense on their side by just going and boosting the nearest attack unit. Or, for example, they can repeatedly hit stuff with their stick and make sure that they have something like Wrathful Strike over here available, allowing them to attack stuff at close range as well. So while the Cudgel skill is not necessary to keep on them, for Clerics, I personally find that it's just a solid idea, because if something does get close, they don't have any healing to do. Sometimes removing the threat to your team is better than trying to heal away the damage that it does. So something like Wrathful Strike does work very well, considering that many of the times that you hire a Cleric, they will already be classed as a Divine element. Okay, moving on to the next one. Okay, next we get to my personal favorite, and this is the Rune Fencer. Basically, they are, once again, another jack-of-all-trades class, but you can do a lot of very fun things with this one. So personally, I mean, my favorite, just because I like having spears, is just the standard, put whatever heavy armor is available at the time, get a Volge +1 for that breach effect. Later on, this can become a Scorpion for a poison effect, and then combine it with an Instill. So they are effectively hitting twice. Their first hit does normal damage, their second Instill hit will do 25% of that initial hit, and then it will try to do its secondary chance, which is the breach in this case. So you can kind of see it as attacking 3 times from melee range. From there, generally speaking, it's a good idea to give them a wide variety of different spells. Usually the standard is going to be 1 damaging spell, 1 Instill, a heal of some variety, which, by the way, it is actually worth keeping a heavier heal on them. Because they're a hybrid, they will be attacking just as often as they'll be casting, so having more expensive spells is perfectly viable for them, because they'll usually have the MP to use them. And then Boon of Swiftness, again for the same reason as the Cleric. So, depending on what you want out of them, their skills consist of having an HP boost and MP boost as usual resists. They can recruit, they can meditate, and they can concentrate. So Concentrate just increases your odds of debuffs or spells landing. They don't really have any spells that really require this. So I'm actually, truth be told, I don't even know why they have concentration, because I have never seen anything other than 100% hit odds for their spells, but alright, whatever, it's just sort of there. Now, I like running something like this. So, Meditate allows them to constantly be overflowing with MP. Sometimes they go for a basic attack, sometimes they go for a spell, but either way, they will functionally be able to use most of their list at all times. You know, maybe they're out of range, they go for a lightning bow, maybe somebody's hurt, they go for a heal, maybe somebody's needing a little bit of a boost, so they boost them up with Boon of Swiftness. Generally speaking, this just keeps them very, very nimble. They're able to pivot between different things, and you can go for finishers at the same time. Going for a health boost is just a solid choice, especially if you have Denim as your Rune Fencer here. And having a Recruit on there is good, because you know what, if they're always going to have MP, they're always going to be kind of wandering around the field, so to speak, there's a decent chance that they're going to be around, you know, units that are at low health. So at that point, you might as well try to make some friends. A quick little note on Recruit, because I have seen it come up pretty regularly. If you have if you target a unit with Recruit, if it has a red X on them, it just simply means they are not a valid target. So it will give you, for example, as you can see on this menu, like where it's showing a red X or a blue circle, it will give you the same thing over the Recruit icon when you're targeting somebody, to let you know if it even has a chance to actually function in that case, because a Recruit is very situational. So if somebody is mentally affected in some way, so for example, say they're scared, or they're charmed, or they're petrified, or they're asleep, you can't talk to them as if they're a normal person, so therefore you won't be able to negotiate with them to be recruited. Alright? Just so you know, that is a thing. So if you got a blue circle, that means you have a chance, at which point you just lower their health, and hopefully you'll be able to get them recruited. Alrighty, so next is a personal favorite that I like to call the Switch Archer here. So basically, this consists of a light crossbow or light bow, and you essentially just kind of switch between bow and crossbow as is fitting for your particular situation. Like the archer, you know, you go for bows if you've got a height advantage. You go for crossbows if you don't. But an interesting thing here is that it allows you to use this Instill skill over here with a ranged weapon. So, for example, if you happen to have a unit with pretty high dexterity, this means that you can essentially get plus 25% bonus damage on a ranged attack, allows you to pack on some heavy armor onto what is effectively a short-range archer, while still having the ability to heal. Now, while this is a pretty effective unit, it basically allows them to also switch into spells. If a unit, for example, is resistant to physical attacks, you use a spell on them. If they're resistant to spells, you use your kind of rapid-fire bow situation on them, and it still retains the ability for them to use their shield. Now, I haven't mentioned the shield up to this point, but shields are very effective spacing tools. So, for example, you want to get into a location, you can shield bash those units out of the way. As long as they're on flat ground and there's nothing behind them, you can usually knock a unit backwards. And if there's another unit with a pincer, you can shield bash into that pincer attack. So this is potentially a very useful tool to have, but it also means that if, for example, somebody's standing on the edge of a ledge or the edge of a wall or something like that, you can simply slap them with a shield. In some cases, knocking a unit off of a wall and straight out of the fight will essentially be the same thing as just having killed them outright. If they can't fight, then, you know, they're not exactly participating anymore. So this is just a build that's very, very handy for a lot of situations. You can do something similar with the warrior as well as with the archer, but I feel like this is definitely the stronger way to go about it. And in this particular case, I wanted to make sure that they can do a lot of different things, so we keep a leaf for healing, we keep a blessing stone for reviving another unit. If there's a boss or something like that, we keep a Dynast King's Mead for destroying their defense, because, you know, obviously people are going to be a lot worse at fighting if you give them some liquor. And we keep a fear-removing grog on there, just in case they're hit with fear. So this is just a fun one to play around with. Meditate is primarily just here to keep Boon of Swiftness going. Concentration really has no purpose here, but I want to feel like it maybe will somehow help with something, so I just kind of keep it there because it's fun. Anyway, moving on to the next one. Alright, so next we have the Knight. So, once again, you might notice I'm really liking keeping units with shields and crossbows. Just know their damage isn't going to be insane. I call them, light damage dealers for a reason. But usually there's a lot of utility you can get out of light units. So in this case, they're paradoxically a light tank. So they've got a light crossbow, so they're going to be just taking targets of opportunity, just sort of plinking away at anything that's within range, but they're going to be taking advantage of phalanx to reduce their incoming damage, as well as rampart aura to interrupt the movement of units around them, as well as rampart shadow to continue causing all kinds of disruptions for the units around them, to just be a nuisance. So the purpose of this unit is effectively to block enemy units. It's effectively here to try and waste everybody's time and give you control over all movement. See, you can run through your own ramparts, shadows, and rampart auras and things like that. The enemy can't. So, for example, you can box them into certain locations, you can drop a bunch of rampart shadows and things in their way, and you can have this unit reposition themselves in order to prevent their movement. The Knight is, while they're labeled as a tank, the Knight is primarily a movement disruption unit. As their description says, there is nothing that quite stops an advance like a Knight. So, just so you know, that is definitely a thing. Even units that teleport, by the way, will get caught in the rampart aura. The only ones that can actually get around it are flyers. So this is just a fun little way to disrupt, but at the same time, you can basically swap out any type of weapon for this. For example, if you want to be able to have access to a double hit, you might go for swords. If you want to have access to one big, solid, chunky, meaty hit right out of the bat, or you want to be able to counterattack while doing this, then you go for the Balder Hammer. A little bit of a side note, by the way, whenever Phalanx triggers, it prevents counterattacks from working, so it may not always be the most reliable for dealing damage, but that's not their purpose. So there we go. They're a nice little disruption for you to play around with. And let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Alright, so next we get to the Terror Knight, the sort of premier can opener unit. So the Terror Knight, technically speaking, is sort of a middle ground between the Knight and the Berserker. We've covered the Knight, we haven't covered the Berserker, but there's a reason for this. So the Terror Knight's main thing is inflicting fear. This is a debuff that, while not exclusive to them, might as well be. Not many units have access to it. Now, between their different skills here, they have access to two-handers, heavy axes, heavy hammers, cudgels, and crossbows. So they can do the same shield and crossbow thing if you're also having fun with all of that. But realistically, you usually want to go for one of the big meaty weapons because of the kinds of damage that they can do. So, there's three builds that I would kind of recommend for the Terror Knight here, just to give you some ideas. So, for example, if, once again, you're like me and you like obsessing with that crossbow and shield build, generally you would just keep Lament of the Dead on there, put them into an annoying position, combine it with Rampart Aura, and then just boost their HP, and there you go. You have a nice little, passive defense-destroying annoyance tank in that situation. So then we would just, let's say, put some crossbows on there. We go ahead and put said shooty things in here. There we go. Now again, this is mostly just for annoyance, but let's say you want to have something a little bit more, effective and more fitting for this particular unit type. So if you want to have a bulky kind of defense tank type situation, you want to just have them be extremely annoying while still being very extremely terrifying, then you go for something like Hammer and Shield here. Drain Heart will allow them to keep their health topped up for the most part. Sleep might not be terribly accurate, but it's something that allows them to cheaply engage at range, whereas Drain Mind might be just what you need to prevent an enemy hit from coming to your way. Like, Drain Mind is less about making sure that you have MP, and more about making sure that the other guy doesn't. You actually will rarely end up breaking even on this. But for example, you see somebody with a threatening finisher that you're afraid of, you go ahead and snipe them with Drain Mind real quick, and suddenly they're back to basic attacks. So, just something to bear in mind there. But this is a solid little loadout here. It's gives them different ways to engage at different ranges. You can also stick something like a stun on there as well. They don't really have a wide variety of spells, but this will do the job just fine, and especially if you stack them with all Baldur gear. I don't have any Baldur pants on the save file apparently, but you'll notice it's all boosting intelligence, which will boost your damage with that drain health and drain MP. If you want sleep and stun to land more often, you're looking more for mind off these different pieces of equipment. So let's see if we can... I don't believe there's any that are going to be boosting mind off of these shields. It doesn't look like it. Yeah, we're not really going to be getting any mind bonuses off any of our armors, but that's okay. You can potentially, if you happen to get a hold of a Ring of the Mind, it can make them pretty dramatically more consistent with their spells. But generally speaking, I would recommend something more like this, where you go for a heavy weapon, you go for the Fearful Impact. Concentration will also boost their debuff accuracy, by the way. You can just go ahead and slap that on there. Just so you know, Shadow Break, you don't come up with... you don't see enemy Rampart Shadows that often. I wouldn't recommend even putting Shadow Break on there at this point. Maybe something will get changed at some point, but for now, Shadow Break still isn't terribly useful. Usually, this is going to be the standard build for a Terror Knight, though. Has been since the SNES. Basically, big, meaty axe or sword or whatever else, and you can just go ahead and combine in Fearful Impact, a Pincer Attack, and Constitution. However, once again, just like the Warrior, if you want to absolutely make a can opener, what you want to do is go for the Zweihander. Later on, this can be switched out for the Claymore. You combine that with that Fearful Impact, and there you go. You essentially have a unit that will completely bottom out something's defense pretty much immediately. This can combine very well with archers. Essentially, you're combining that Fearful Impact and that Breach effect to guarantee that a unit is more or less marked for death. Any archers hitting them will effectively be doing well beyond any normal damage they would normally be able to do. And any other follow-ups will also simply crush them. Their offense will be functionally non-existent. So this is just a really solid can opener. It is the most reliable way for you to break down enemy defenses by far. But, you know, there may be more complicated options down the road. Either way, definitely by far the most recommended Terror Knight build. Moving on. Alright, next we get to the Berserker. So this is going to be your premier pincer attack specialist, oddly enough, but they specialize in swinging wildly all over the dang place. Interestingly enough, they actually can combine two different damage up moves at the same time. So, for example, being able to attack more often is in many cases going to be more valuable than one big meaty hit. So, my personal favorite for Berserkers is going to be Dagger and Shield, because effectively Berserk increases physical damage and causes it to hit in an AoE, while Sanguine Assault increases your strength by 50% for the next attack. This effectively means that they'll be combining the fact that the Dagger has pretty good scaling damage on there, while effectively, well, powering through defenses for the most part. But if you're in a situation where you don't want to swing in a wide arc, you can always swap in for the shield to go for a shield bash instead and not waste your Berserk. So this is all handy by itself, but you can also combine in a pincer attack. A fun note, by the way, is if you have a pincer attack and a Berserk at the same time, you can't technically combine two Berserks, two Sanguines, two pincer attacks, as well as any Dagger with a secondary effect on there. And you can effectively hit about 10 units at once, just having the two pincer against each other. Like, for example, if we look at the Dirk +1, we can see that it has a silence effect on there. If you're running into a situation where there's a lot of units, like let's say tanks, like tanky knights or Terror Knights or whatever else, that are healing or stunning or what have you, you put these, you give them a Dirk, right? You have a Warrior with Vigorous nearby. They trigger Vigorous, they both trigger Berserk, they both trigger Sanguine. You have them stand diagonal, they just kind of like scissor in from a diagonal, and then the two of them attack and pincer at the same time, just shredding an entire crowd in a big meat grinder. Oh, it's downright silly, but it works. So, anyway, So this one's a pretty fun one, but you really can combine them with just about anything. Technically speaking, you can go for your heavy axes and heavy hammers and things like that, and they'll do the job just fine. Like the previous thing with inflicting silence on stuff applies to any bolter weapon. But realistically speaking, it's one of these cases where you're making a choice between if you go for a heavy weapon, you will have access to a counterattack, but you will have less control over your Berserk. So if Berserk triggers, then you won't be able to do as much with it. Whereas on the flip side, if you want to, if you want to have more control, you go for a shield and a lighter version of the weapon. Generally speaking, with how many buffs they get, you are perfectly fine going for a lighter hammer or axe. You don't really have to worry about losing out on much offense as far as that goes. You're going to have a slightly lower, maximum damage in that case, but you're going to still be doing just fine. I have kind of overlooked claws for this one. Obviously, the previous poison claw strategy can work just fine for them as well. So if you wanted mass claw poison, that is certainly an option. But again, I know personally I prefer going for a shield and one-handed weapon here. Armor-wise, you just go for anything that boosts strength and you'll be just fine. Strength or defense will benefit them greatly. As far as items are concerned, what I would recommend is a Basin of Time, which I hope I have on this. Okay, apparently I don't have on this save file. But in their particular case, they usually want to carry around a few buff items. Just to kind of help them out. So an Airy Ion Plume will improve their maximum damage, which combines very well with the two other bits of offense they've got going on for them. Putting on a Fortify is just a solid idea because, again, they're going to be pretty much directly in front for the most part. And then on top of that, you're going to want to pick up a Crystallized Flame for them as well, which will allow them to resist spellcasters because they're incredibly weak to those. On top of that, you usually want to give them a heal of some sort. The reason that I'm recommending carrying more items on some characters than others is simply because they're usually going to be in a better position to do so. Like, for example, a Berserker can afford to take a turn to, for example, buff and set themselves up for a pincer attack, rather than always needing to take an action directly. So in this particular case, we're going to give them a offense buff, we're going to give them a defense buff, and then we're going to give them the ability to resist magic as well. And they can just sort of use whichever one is appropriate in their given situation. I put an Exorcism on here simply because they might be in the front row when there's a zombie that's downed, and it might be handy for them to have. So the one thing I will say as far as building Berserkers, while any of their weapons will have their own, benefits, there really is nothing that you can go wrong with, except for one, and that would be the Boulder Mace right here. Later on, this will be the Damask Mace. So the Mace is a strange weapon. I would never recommend putting this on a Berserker, but basically the Mace is a spellcasting tool that is specifically used to boost range. While it does have what is on paper a decent attack value, it doesn't seem to be an accurate attack value. So the Mace is you can think of it as more of a trick gimmick weapon than something that you directly want to use in most cases. Like, for example, earlier you saw I had one on the Terror Knight, and I didn't even recommend it. So, like, personally, I kept a Boulder Mace on a Terror Knight for having this extra spell range, which was just fun to play around with. As far as being optimal goes, it's really not exactly optimal, interestingly enough, despite being usable on that Terror Knight there, specifically for making debuffs, more available range-wise. It actually reduces mind, making them less likely to hit, which is... Anyway, so yeah, this is not a good physical weapon even in the hands of the Berserker, so it's not really recommended to put on them, just so you know. Alright, let's move on to the next one. Alright, so next up here we are going to have the Swordmaster. So they're only going to be available from Farampa Wildwood this early in the game. They only have one weapon type that they can use, and that's the two-handed katana, and quite frankly, their build options are extremely limited. So they're more or less a one-trick pony for all intents and purposes. Usually you want to give them something like a Ring of Vitality to boost their defense as much as possible, but more or less you give them armor, you give them a weapon, and they're off to the races. They only have one weapon type. You want to pretty much always keep Preempt on there. Now, as far as their other skills go, for now, like, they will get more later, but Mighty Strike, Preempt, and Falling Blade, you might as well just always keep these ones on there. What this consists of, Preempt, if it triggers at the start of the turn, will cause them to attack if they're attacked by an enemy. If you set up Falling Blade beforehand, this is a 100% hit and crit move. This will cause them to knock the unit backwards, effectively causing them to disable the enemy unit before their actual attack, meaning that they get to attack instead of the enemy. And then Mighty Strike is just an increase of 25% to attack armor penetration. So effectively, you just keep all of these on here, trigger Falling Blade as often as possible, and just leave them in the front row casting buffs. That's really all there is to the Swordmaster here. They're not terribly complicated at this point, and realistically, this is their they're entirely a one-trick pony, but they do it well. They're entirely a duelist kind of class. They don't hold up well versus spellcasters or archers or things like that, but against melee characters, they can absolutely clown on them. So they're a very good powerhouse this early on. Their two-handed katanas are actually pretty strong in this version. I mentioned this specifically because back in their original PSP version, they were a very bad class. Anyhow, very good to keep around for a mass strengthen buff on all nearby units, as well as good for a little bit of a passive heal with Harvest Dance. Most of the time, you'll just be spending your points on Falling Blade and just watching them do all their cool kung fu nonsense. Yeah, usually you'll just kind of see them out fighting people in the front, and that's about it. Nothing too fancy there, moving on. Alright, next up we have the Dragoon. So this is your dedicated anti-monster unit, however, they have a bit more to them. So, weapon-wise, they have access to one-handed swords, two-handed swords, axes of both varieties, spears, cudgels, crossbows. Still wouldn't recommend cudgels on them. I'm not sure why they have access to them, but they've got the usual health and MP boosts. They've got access to a pincer attack. They've got Rampart Aura, Siege, as well as these down here. These are their kind of signature moves: Dragon Slayer, Dragon's Bane, Beast Slayer, Beast Bane. So usually what I'd recommend is you scout out maps beforehand, and if you see a beast unit, you simply go Beast Slayer and Beast Bane, and then you keep pretty much anything else you want to on the extra slot. So these skills will only trigger if it's relevant for them to trigger. So like, for example, I like having a pincer attack on here. But for example, like if there's no beasts on the map, they will never trigger Beast Bane. But you can basically stack these two up on top of another to completely delete beasts and dragons. Beast Bane by itself will boost damage dealt to all, and we're just going to say Bane in general, will boost your damage versus beasts or dragons for all units that are within their AoE. This only applies to melee attacks, though. The Slayer skills, however, will cause the unit in question to actually ignore the armor of the target in question. Interestingly enough, by the way, if you want to just run Beast Slayer and Dragon Slayer, they also can use, for example, crossbows. Like, they can use heavy crossbows with the Slayer skills, despite the fact that it says that they're melee only. So this is also a perfectly viable build. However, it basically means that they are the only one that's able to do that extra damage versus that unit. So it's kind of up to you. Like, this is perfectly viable if you just give them, for example, like, let's say a plume. You start off with a plume early on, and you have them activate the relevant Slayer skill. You have them take a snipe with their crossbow, and there you go. A couple shots, said unit will probably be done and dealt with relative ease there. Additionally, in that case, if you're running that kind of unit, you may want to pick up something like Siege. If you're expecting to run into them, into having some issues actually reaching them. However, in most cases, you would just simply slot in something extra, like a health boost or something like that. In most cases, beasts and dragons will be out in front, but if you expect to have some difficulties with Rampart Aura, you could always put Siege on there. So this Sniper Dragoon is perfectly valid. It also keeps them relatively safe because they're just simply plinking away at stuff from far away. At the same time, you can go for your preferred melee weapon option to simply set up pincers. A fun note, by the way, they can both counter and pincer with a spear. So you can have 2 Dragoons on opposite ends of each other. This is actually a fan favorite. You can have 2 units with spears on opposite ends of each other. Because they both use spears, they both have better defense versus spears, but you just have them surround a unit. 1 unit attacks with a spear. Their target turns around and tries to counter them, at which point the other unit follows up with a counter, at which point they then also follow up with a pincer, and basically this dude is just getting stabbed 3 times in a row. It's kind of wonderful. Anyway, so that's the overview for the Dragoon. Moving on to the next one. Alright, next we have the Ninja. So this is primarily a debuff specialist, but they're able to kind of build for a lot of different options. So to start off with, I'd say the strongest early game build to give for this guy: shield, bow, and then you pick up Benam at this point. Later on down the road, you'll have access to Envenom. Alright? So you basically give them any short bow. Their damage is irrelevant. They are essentially going to be throwing out debuffs. So early game, what I would recommend is going for Concentration, which will guarantee that ninja spells hit with 100% accuracy. They have Shadowbind, which is a stop spell. Alright, this is going to be the main thing that they're going to be doing damage with. But it kind of breaks down like this. You give them their bow skill so that they're a little bit better with the bow. You give them their Concentration here to guarantee that Shadowbind here, which normally has very low odds to hit, will always hit. Now this will stop a unit in place, effectively disabling their turn entirely. Usually it'll last 1 or 2 rounds that unit can simply do nothing, again with 100% accuracy. Then you have Benum and Bridle that are available. These will trigger like the other Instill skills, just kind of activating at the start of your turn. Benum causes them to lose a turn 50% of the time. Bridle means that they can't talk, but if you stack 2 of them at the same time, they will effectively alternate every now and then. So this means that sometimes you want Stun, sometimes you want Bridle. If you're really only going for one thing, I would recommend Benum, but Bridle is very good for shutting down casters, for example. Steel Stance will increase their defense, which means that they can functionally be invisible, because nothing will target them with their higher defense. Back attack is just kind of something to have here. Like, I know the immediate temptation is to take double attack and go 2 swords and go full weeb ninja mode, which is fine, it can work. If you're going to go for that, I would recommend going for something along the lines of double attack, going for the double one-handed katanas, but only ever charging in if Steel Stance activates. Because realistically, they can keep that going for 1 turn, Steel Stance activates, they run in, they take some attacks, they hopefully survive that round, and then they run the hell away because their defense in any other situation is absolutely paper thin. So basically, yes, they can keep it up, but only for a little while. Now you can get a little bit trickier with this. Like, for example, you may want to go for something like a dagger in their offhand to give them that parry chance, or maybe you want to go for the whole sword and bow thing because you think it's the 80s and you want to look like the old ninja assassin stereotype. Either way, their purpose is basically hit and run type tactics, but just when you get access to poisoned arrows, they are an absolute godsend in terms of just being able to completely melt health. Because again, it's not very many cases where you can have guaranteed poison, and effectively guaranteed poison at range. So, just something to consider there. Definitely would recommend the Trick Arrow Ninja to start off with, and then just kind of work in the if you want to go for that higher damage build type situation. Just do 2 swords, then you do Steel Stance, you do the 2-handers, or the 2 hands here. You put their skill on there, and then you make sure, again, to only attack once Steel Stance is actually active. Concentration is good to keep on there, because once it deactivates, you could always escape while dropping a Shadowbind on your way out. So again, hit and run, that kind of stuff. Additionally, if you want to be a little bit faster with this, you can also go Double Knives. So Double Knife is pretty solid. Overall, weight-wise, they're pretty similar this time around. But just so you know, that is an option if there's a certain knife that you'd prefer. Alright, second to last here, we have the Beast Tamer. I mean, it's pretty much right in the name there. They tame beasts. Their purpose is to boost up beasts as well as get them on your side. Generally speaking, what I'd recommend on this guy is just going Lobber and a couple of status blowguns. Reason for this, something like a charm dart, especially if you have a archer nearby with Eagle Eye, will effectively be a guaranteed charm on any nearby unit, which is absolutely hilarious. Same thing for the mute dart. Having them empower whatever your preferred beast or dragon or whatever is can be pretty darn handy. And generally speaking, you really only want to keep Tame and Subdue on there whenever you happen to have a thing that you're trying to hire. But then you keep the Lobber on there, and then the bulk of their damage would actually come from these shots. So shots are pretty darn solid. They're basically a set amount of damage that can increase with physical up cards. But they can function as the team's Grenadier. Now, these are not exactly cheap to use, but they are potentially game-changing in the right circumstance. So, for example, you put Boon of Swiftness on them, you take a bunch of these shots, and you have them chuck grenades like crazy when stuff is getting a little bit dire. So, overall, this is pretty solid. The damage that you get off of the finisher for the blowguns is pretty good damage as well. And usually they're bulky enough that you really don't have to worry too much about keeping them safe. So yes, have a Grenadier. They make your beast units do a bit better. There are other options as well, like for example, one that I particularly liked was combining the hammer over here, which apparently I don't have any more in stock, as well as the Petrodart blowgun, which I don't have on hand at this moment. Can we actually make that yet? There's the Petrodart right here. This is one of those interesting situations where you have an unusually high bonus on something. So, for example, having a light hammer and the Petrodart blowgun with its plus 15 strength bonus out of nowhere can make for a very, very tanky beast tamer over here. So just kind of something to bear in mind. It's going to be far more useful than any shield that they can have. Not to mention, you potentially can guarantee a petrification on something. So, alright. So, last class to cover for the time being, because we're not going to cover beast units, is going to be the Varden here. A very effective early game tribrid, but what I would recommend, by and large, for newer players, go daggers, go bows, put Elcolas Winds on there, which will give air touched. Put this guy nearby your archers, so that he can buff their arrows with this air touched ability, basically increasing their damage by 25%. And then simply wander. I mean, this guy is... It's strange to say, but he's an effective wandering unit. He's one of the few cases where his movement is so high that he can reasonably go around just getting his pick of cards, and, well, his stats are dramatically higher than everybody else at this point. Like, you can see he's got 20 higher strength than our archer over here. Dex is comparable, but 20 higher vitality. His stats are absolutely jacked, so realistically anything you do with him is going to be great. And yes, you can technically get generic Vartans as well. But just so you know, yes, generally speaking, anything you do with him will be great. But Dagger Finisher for him hits like an absolute truck. He already starts off as Wind. It's just a good synergy. Give him a Blessing Stone to be able to fly in and revive somebody at any point. You know, healing, exorcism for the same reason, and there you go. Not really anything too fancy to worry about with this guy. Pretty much anything you have him do is going to be great, but this way, if something's weak to arrows, you plink it with arrows, like if there's a squishy that's far away. If you have something that's close by, you go for the knife. If you have something that's earth, you delete them with Heart Crusher. And if you have somebody that's in need of support, there you go, you have it right there. Generally speaking, I like to stack a lot of various missile abilities on this guy just to exploit elemental weaknesses. But again, you know, mileage may vary as far as what you prefer there. And if you're wondering, while you're in Farampa, you can actually get a lot of beast units as well. Some early ones that I would recommend. If you go to the top left map, there will be zombie octopi that you can hire. And these are just very solid in general. The AI will rarely, if ever, carry exorcism, so they can, functionally speaking, just die and come back to life repeatedly. It's very solid. If you want to have the best support available, go for Griffins. They're available in the very first map in the forest. And all you have to do is just give them a bunch of healing items, and there you go. Just having a bunch of Blessing Stones on a Griffin means that you can bring your team back from the brink if stuff starts going poorly. Additionally, if you're wondering how to even unlock the forest, by the way, if you just go to the Warren Report, you go down here to the talk section, you'll see that you click on Farampa Open to Hunting. Many of these stories will open different areas, but there you go. That'll give you access to a lot of these classes, and that's just located right over here. So anyway, hopefully this was a useful little kind of early game starter guide type of situation. Bear in mind that obviously there's a ton of different builds you can do with all these different characters, and really you should be trying to put together stuff that you personally find just fun and interesting. Like some prefer, sword and board knights. I find crossbow and shield to be hilarious, so that's what I prefer. But everyone's going to have their preferences. So hopefully this helped, and yeah, y'all have a good one. Take care, and let me know if I can answer any more questions.